The fluorescent lights hummed at 4:19 a.m., a sound like electricity running through bone. Megan O'Brien moved through Oak Creek Memorial's ICU with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd learned to become invisible, her worn combat boots hidden beneath scrubs, laces double-knotted the way she learned in training 12 years ago. The leather was cracked but meticulously maintained, polished to military standard despite being hidden from view every single shift. She restocked the medication cart in Bay 3, hands moving with practiced precision as she organized vials of propofol and midazolam, her fingers running along the edges of each label. The antiseptic smell was sharp in the cold air, cutting through the deeper undertone of human suffering that no amount of bleach could fully mask. She didn't shake. That's what people remembered later, that she didn't shake. But the tremor in her hands was there if you looked closely enough, a fine vibration she'd learned to hide by gripping clipboards, by keeping her fingers occupied with small mechanical tasks. Exit routes. She'd scanned them the moment she clocked in, automatic as breathing. Bay 1 had 2 doors, one to the main corridor, one to the emergency stairwell on the east wall. Bay 4 was a trap unless you went through the ventilation access panel in the ceiling, which she could reach in under 4 seconds. The way her eyes moved through each room wasn't curiosity. It was threat assessment. At the patient's bedside, she read vitals without speaking, becoming something less than a person in the eyes of the doctors who swept past in their white coats. Diastolic pressure holding steady. O2 saturation at 97%. Heart rate regular and strong. She noted everything with the same tactical precision she'd used in Marjah, the same clinical detachment that had kept her team alive for 11 hours after the rest of their position had been overrun. That was different work. This was better work. This was saving people who didn't get shot at. Her left wrist bore a small tattoo, coordinates, the latitude and longitude of FOB Shank in Loga province, hidden beneath a watch with a military-grade band. She adjusted the watch as she checked a patient's full line, covering the numbers with the motion. Nobody asked about it. Nobody asked about anything. That was the entire point of being invisible. The overhead speaker crackled at 5:22 a.m. Static, then a voice like honey poured over gravel, incoming critical. Coast Guard training accident. ETA 8 minutes. Prepare trauma Bay 1. Megan's face went pale. Not visibly pale, her composure was better than that, but something shifted behind her eyes, a door opening onto a room she'd locked. Commander Hayes. Her son Jacob's commanding officer. She'd met him twice, both times at official Coast Guard functions where Jacob stood at attention and Megan stood 5 paces back, a peripheral figure in dress blues that didn't fit quite right anymore. She moved toward the charge nurse station before the speaker finished. The movements were efficient, nothing rushed. A hand on the counter. A breath that steadied itself. The incoming patient, she said quietly. I'm requesting his assignment. Sarah Chen, the charge nurse, looked up from her computer. She was good people, had been working ICU longer than most, knew the difference between a request and a need. The training accident? Coast Guard. Yes. You're connected. My son serves under his command. Sarah nodded, made the assignment without hesitation. Megan O'Brien, Bay 1. In nursing, that meant something. A connection to the patient was either a liability or an asset, depending on the nurse. Sarah had learned years ago which category Megan fell into. The kind who worked harder when it mattered. The kind who didn't make mistakes. The kind whose hands didn't shake when lives depended on steadiness. Dr. Sterling entered the ICU at 5:43 a.m., 6 minutes before Hayes arrived, his white coat pristine enough to hurt your eyes. The coat was armor, that's what it looked like, the way he moved through the space wearing it. His voice came before he did, traveling through the unit like something physical, something with weight and force. He was talking about protocols, about hierarchies, about how the attending physicians made decisions and everyone else executed them. He was talking to no one in particular, which meant he was talking to everyone. He noticed Megan at Bay 1 immediately. She was reading Hayes's chart with unusual intensity, her eyes moving down the page with the kind of focus that belonged to someone who understood what she was reading, someone who maybe understood it too well. Sterling's eyes narrowed. He was the kind of man who noticed when people stepped outside their lanes, and he was the kind of man who made them regret it. The ambulance doors opened at 5:49 a.m. The paramedics moved with controlled urgency, the stretcher bearing a man whose right side was purple with bruising, whose breathing was shallow and ragged, whose left eye was swollen shut. Commander Hayes, age 46, call sign Bulldog, had been running a high-altitude insertion drill when his parachute failed to deploy properly. He'd hit hard. Everything after that was physics and trauma. Megan watched them wheel him in. She didn't look away. She didn't flinch. Her hands gripped the bed rail and she waited for the moment when she'd be useful, when standing still would be over and action would begin. Sterling was beside her within seconds, his presence making the air pressure change in the bay, the way a predator's proximity changes everything in a room without a word being spoken. "This patient is critical," he said. His voice had a texture like gravel, like something that had been through a machine and come out harder on the other side. "Attending staff will coordinate all care decisions. Nursing will follow protocol." It wasn't directed at her. It was directed at her. Megan understood the difference. "Vital stable?" she asked quietly. "I'll be asking the questions here, O'Brien." The way he said her name, not Ms. O'Brien, just O'Brien, like she was infantry, told her everything she needed to know about how this was going to go. She looked down at Hayes's chest, counted the respirations. 18 per minute. Shallow. Compensatory. The pneumothorax was building pressure somewhere in his right hemithorax, and within 6 to 8 hours, if nobody caught it before the tension built too high, his heart would start to deviate and his blood pressure would crater and he would die on this bed while she watched. She said nothing. Sterling moved to the nurse's station and found Sarah Chen. "Who assigned O'Brien to this case?" His jaw was already tight, preloaded with the answer he didn't want to hear. "She requested it. The patient commands her son." Sterling's voice went quiet in a way that was worse than loud. "We'll see about that." He pulled out his phone. Megan could see him from Bay 1, could see the way his thumb moved across the screen, making calls, building something. He was establishing dominance over this case the way he established dominance over everything, through accumulated power, through the network of people who owed him favors and the people who feared him enough to do what he asked without asking why. By 6:15 a.m., the entire attending staff had been briefed. 10 doctors in total, the morning shift, the afternoon holdovers, everyone with any authority over Hayes's care. Sterling had positioned himself as the orchestra conductor, the one who would make the decisions, and the one who would make sure everyone remembered that nursing was a subordinate position, that O'Brien was a subordinate person, that she could stand at the bedside and watch but never lead, never suggest, never do anything except execute the plans that came down from above her. Megan changed Hayes's for tubing and didn't speak. She checked his pupils and didn't speak. She ran a 12-lead EKG and noted the flattened T wave in leads V2 through V4, which meant the right side of his heart was under pressure and didn't have much time. She documented everything with precision and didn't speak. At the nurse's station, Sterling was telling one of the younger residents about proper chain of command, about how things worked in his ICU, about what happened to people who overstepped. His voice had the texture of a knife being sharpened, each word another pass against the stone. Around him, the 10 attending physicians nodded, absorbed his message like plants absorbing light, understood that the hierarchy was his to control and that anyone who challenged it would be made an example of. Megan restocked the crash cart in Bay 1 and moved through her shift like a ghost in Scrubs, and nobody noticed that the woman standing at the bedside, the one who looked so soft and deferential and easy to dismiss, was counting the seconds until something went catastrophically wrong. Because something always did when you put a man with catastrophic injuries in a hospital bed and surrounded him with doctors too busy establishing turf to notice when the patient started dying. She didn't speak. She waited. That was her discipline, the ability to hold still, to hold her silence, to let people underestimate her while she prepared for the moment when being invisible would no longer be an option. But that wasn't the worst part. The commander's wife stood at his bedside, one hand resting on his shoulder when Dr. Sterling arrived for rounds. His adult daughter sat in the corner chair, watching the monitors with the intensity of someone who didn't understand what any of them meant but knew bad news when she saw it. Megan was adjusting the 4-pump, her fingers steady on the dial, explaining each medication change in the low, careful voice she used with families, the one that said she understood their fear without flinching from her own. "Nurse O'Brien." Sterling's voice arrived before he did, cutting through the room like a scalpel through skin. "I don't recall asking for your medical opinion." He stood in the doorway with 4 residents trailing behind him, their faces already arranged in deference. "Perhaps you've forgotten the difference between following orders and giving them." His tone had the particular cruelty of a man who'd learned that volume and audience were the same as authority. The words carried into the hallway. Megan heard a nurse at the station pause, listening. "Though I suppose that's the problem with people who aim too high," Sterling continued, turning slightly so his residents could see him work. "They forget their station." The commander's wife stiffened. Her daughter looked away. Megan took one measured breath. Her hand stayed steady on the 4-pole. She'd held worse under fire. She'd held dying men in the dark. She could hold this. A single tear escaped her left eye, not from fear, but from the pressure of swallowing it down, the same way pressure built behind a locked door. She wiped it with the back of her hand without breaking eye contact with Sterling. When she moved, it was with the fluid precision of someone who'd practiced composure in rooms where the cost of losing it was measured in lives. "Let this be a lesson in appropriate professional boundaries," Sterling was saying to his residents, his voice dropping into that pedagogical register that made every word sound inevitable. "Nurses who've watched too much Grey's Anatomy sometimes confuse their role with ours." She walked past him toward the door. Sterling didn't move, so she had to brush his shoulder slightly, a calculated moment of contact that made it clear she didn't fear him. At the threshold, she turned back. "Cruelty doesn't become you, doctor," she said quietly, her voice level as a surgeon's hand. "But I suppose we all find our level." She walked past him out of the room. The hallway felt longer than it should have been. Her boots, the old worn ones hidden beneath her scrubs, the ones that had walked through Helmand Province at 0300 hours under a moon that cast shadows like weapons, they made no sound on the linoleum. The fluorescent lights buzzed their mechanical hymn. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She moved. The next morning, Megan arrived for her shift and saw it immediately. Sterling had posted a formal disciplinary notice on the main unit board where all staff gathered for shift change. The header read, "Performance Improvement Plan, M. O'Brien, RN." Beneath it, in crisp bureaucratic language, the words hung like a verdict: inappropriate emotional involvement with patient care, boundary violations with patient family members, failure to recognize scope of practice limitations. 10 doctors stood in a cluster reading it. Whispering. Their voices had the particular quality of people discussing someone who couldn't protect herself. Dr. Sterling stood nearby, arms crossed, watching her face register the damage he'd done. He was good at this part, the part where you watched someone understand that you'd taken their reputation and made it a public spectacle. The cruelty was meticulous. The cruelty was professional. Megan read the notice once, completely still. Her jaw tightened by the smallest fraction, barely visible, barely human. She took one measured breath. Her hands removed the notice carefully from the board. She read it again as she folded it, creasing it precisely along its center line, then in half again, then into quarters. The paper crackled like old uniforms being packed away. "You had other options, doctor," she said to Sterling, her voice carrying across the unit in that same low register. The 10 doctors stopped whispering. "But you chose the one that says the most about you." She placed the folded notice in her scrub pocket and walked to the medication room while 10 doctors watched in silence. The silence was so thick you could have performed surgery in it. But that wasn't the worst part. Lunchtime came around noon. The staff break room at Oak Creek Memorial was a long narrow space with a central table and mismatched chairs salvaged from different decades. The refrigerator hummed its constant mechanical dirge. Megan entered with a brown paper lunch bag in one hand and exhaustion etched into the lines around her eyes, 12 hours into a double shift, running on coffee and the discipline that comes from having survived worse. 10 doctors occupied the central table. The entire attending staff, including Sterling. She'd known this was coming the moment she saw them there. She sat at the far end, opened her lunch quietly. A sandwich. An apple. A yogurt. The ordinary ritual of people who got to have ordinary lunches. Sterling caught the eye of the doctor beside him, Dr. Reeves, the cardiologist, and stood without a word. He picked up his tray and moved to a table on the opposite side of the room. The message was transmitted without language. The exodus began. One by one, all 10 doctors followed. No one spoke. No one looked at her. They just stood and moved and chose a different table the way a school of fish changes direction, as one organism, as a practice thing. The last doctor to leave was Dr. Chen, who at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. She hesitated for a moment, glanced back at Megan, then followed the others. The room hummed with refrigerator noise. Megan sat completely still for 15 seconds. Her hands didn't shake. Her face didn't redden. She didn't retreat to a supply closet or cry quietly in a bathroom stall. She just sat there, alone at a table that was suddenly very large, and held the moment the way she'd held so many other moments, like a weapon that belonged to her. She took one measured breath. She wiped a single tear with the back of her hand. Then she picked up her sandwich and took a bite. "Loneliness is temporary, doctor," she said to Sterling's back, loud enough to carry across the room. "But who you choose to be lasts forever." The words landed in the silence like detonations. Dr. Chen faltered in her step. Even Sterling's shoulders tightened slightly, just enough to show that something had registered. A few of the doctors exchanged uncomfortable glances. But no one came back to the table. No one apologized. The hierarchy had been tested and reaffirmed. The hierarchy had won. Or so they thought. 30 minutes later, in his office on the 3rd floor, Dr. Sterling made a phone call. His office had a view of the mountains, the Rockies rising up north of Denver, like a reminder that some things existed beyond the careful borders of his control. He sat in an ergonomic chair that cost more than some people's monthly rent and dialed a number he kept in his personal contacts. "Yes, I need you to pull everything on a nurse named Megan O'Brien," he said, his voice carrying the particular tone of someone accustomed to having requests become immediate actions. Everything. Her licensing records, her personnel history, her references from nursing school. "Yes, I'm aware of privacy regulations, I'm asking for what's public record. And I need it by tomorrow." He listened for a moment. "Excellent. I'll wire the usual retainer." He hung up and immediately dialed again. His second call was to someone named Bill, a board member, judging by the tone Sterling adopted, the slight deference that still contained authority, the way he positioned the request as a favor when really it was an order. "Bill, I need a favor. I have a nurse here who's overstepping her authority, creating an unsafe work environment." "Yes, O'Brien. Can you pull her nursing school references? I need documentation that she's always been problematic." "Yes, I understand it's unusual. I wouldn't ask if I didn't have significant concerns about patient safety." By the time he hung up that call, Sterling was already dialing a third number. His voice had the quality of a man settling into his work, the grim satisfaction of someone engaged in professional destruction. "Janet, it's Sterling. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I need to talk to you about a personnel issue before the next board meeting. We should move quickly on this." Back in the ICU, Commander Hayes was breathing differently. Megan noticed it at 0600 when she arrived for the morning shift, his respiration slightly labored, oxygen saturation sitting at 94% even though his oxygen hadn't been reduced. She placed her hand on his wrist. His pulse was racing. She noted everything in the chart, every vital sign, every observation. Then she found the resident on duty, a young man named Martinez who was already pulling away before she'd finished speaking. The commander's oxygen saturation is dropping, Megan said quietly. His breathing pattern has changed. I'd like to recommend a chest X-ray. Martinez glanced at the monitor, then at her, then away. Sterling said you have a tendency to overreact, he said. The commander is stable. Megan's jaw tightened, that small visible reminder that something was being held down, something was being compressed. She said nothing. She turned back to the commander and checked his lung sounds. The left side was diminished. Something was building in there, something that meant fluid or pressure or a collapse waiting to happen. She checked on him every 15 minutes for the rest of her shift. Documented everything. Her notes were precise and obsessively detailed, the kind of documentation that was either prescient or paranoid, but either way, it left a trail. Sterling, meanwhile, was having a meeting with the hospital's chief nursing officer and a hospital investigator in a conference room on the 4th floor. The investigator was a woman named Patricia Chen, no relation to Dr. Chen, who specialized in personnel issues and had the particular look of someone who'd seen enough institutional cruelty to be unsurprised by it all. I hate to do this, Sterling was saying, his voice modulated into regret that sounded almost real. But I'm concerned about patient safety. Nurse O'Brien has demonstrated a pattern of boundary violations and emotional instability. I've spoken with several of my colleagues and they've expressed similar concerns. He slid a folder across the table. I took the liberty of contacting her references from her nursing school. Several instructors noted concerns about her judgment even back then. Patricia opened the folder, reading through pages he'd clearly already prepared. Her face remained neutral. I'll need to review her personnel file, she said. Of course. Sterling smiled. I anticipated that. He produced a second folder, Megan's entire employment history at Oak Creek Memorial. 5 years of spotless evaluations. 5 years of perfect attendance. 5 years of complaints Sterling had apparently filed only in his own records, never officially, so that his sudden concern about her came across as reluctant rather than vindictive. It was, Megan would have said later if asked, a masterclass in institutional murder. The kind that doesn't leave blood on your hands. The kind that looks like due process. At 1,430 hours, Megan's 17-year-old son Jacob arrived at the hospital after school, still in his Coast Guard drot uniform, a dress blues with a crispness that made him look older and younger at the same time. He found his mother in the hallway outside the ICU, checking a monitor on the wall. "How's Commander Hayes, Mom?" His voice had the careful casualness of someone trying not to see that something was wrong. She forced a smile, the kind that worked on civilians but not on teenagers who'd been trained to observe. "Holding steady. You don't need to worry." Jacob studied her face the way she'd trained him to study tactical situations. "Are you okay? You look." She cut him off, her voice softening. "I'm fine. Just a long shift." He wanted to push but didn't. He understood hierarchy and authority and the places where civilians weren't supposed to ask questions. "I need to grab something from home," he said instead. "I left my drill manual in one of your boxes. Do you have your storage unit key?" She dug in her bag and handed him a key ring. Her hands were steady. "Be careful with those boxes," she said. "Some of them are fragile." He nodded and left. At shift change, Megan returned to Commander Hayes's room. His breathing was noticeably worse. His oxygen saturation had dropped to 88% despite high-flow oxygen running at 12 liters per minute. His chest wall was rising and falling with visible effort, the kind of work that meant his body was fighting for something it couldn't get. She placed her hand on his wrist, feeling his pulse racing beneath the skin. His eyes fluttered but didn't open. The ventilator was ready, it was always ready, but this wasn't the kind of breathing trouble that ventilators fixed. This was something else. This was pressure. This was volume. This was something building inside that had nowhere to go. "Stay with me, Commander," she whispered. Her voice had changed, the military whisper that carried across distance without volume, the one that people on the other side of walls could still hear. "Jacob needs you." She'd said it without thinking. But it was true. And somewhere in the depths of his sedation, maybe he heard it. Maybe it mattered. The room waited. The machines hummed. The next shift arrived, and still no one knew what was coming. 6:07 in the morning, and the ICU held its breath like a held secret. Megan moved through Oak Creek Memorial's corridors with the practiced silence of someone who'd learned to become part of the furniture, her worn combat boots hidden beneath fresh scrubs, the leather still creased from a life that existed only in her own memory now. The fluorescent panels overhead cast their relentless white across every surface, the monitors, the 4 stands, the faces of the overnight staff grinding through the last hour of their shift. She'd been a nurse here for 3 years. Before that, she'd been something else entirely, something the world wasn't ready to understand, something that had changed the way her hands moved, the way her eyes read a room, the way fear registered as simple data instead of emotion. Commander Hayes occupied bed 4, the corner room where the sickest patients went when their families had private insurance and real connections. His chart was thick, 2 days post-accident, fractured ribs, pulmonary contusion, the kind of blunt trauma that made the lungs look like hamburger on X-ray. Megan had read his file twice through. She knew his oxygen saturation had been holding at 92% on the morning shift yesterday, 90% by evening, 88% when the graveyard nurses had signed off at 6 a.m. She knew his wife had asked about his breathing 3 times. She knew the on-call resident had dismissed her concerns with the tone that assumed mothers were always worried about nothing. She stepped into his room at 0607. The machines sang their familiar tune, the ventilator wheezed its rhythmic mechanical prayer, the pulse oximeter beeped its steady count, the cardiac monitor traced the electrical fire that kept him alive. But something had shifted. Megan's body knew it before her mind caught up, that predator sense that had kept her alive in Marjah for 11 hours with her team bleeding out around her. She glanced at the monitor, oxygen saturation, 85%. Her eyes moved to his chest. The left side barely moved on the ventilator's breath cycle. The right side expanded normally. Asymmetric. Wrong. She leaned closer. His trachea, the windpipe visible in the hollow of his neck, was deviated. Shifted to the right. That kind of deviation meant something was pushing against it from the left, something that didn't belong. She placed her gloved hand on his chest, feeling for the vibration of breath. The left lung was silent. The right side roared with air movement, compensating, desperate. She'd seen this exact pattern in a 23-year-old Marine in San Juan Valley whose chest cavity had filled with blood and air, pressurizing like a bomb. That Marine had coded 5 minutes later. Megan had held his chest together while someone else did compressions, had felt the moment his heart stopped fighting. But that was then. This was now. This was Oak Creek Memorial ICU, and she was just a nurse. She moved to the intercom, her voice level and even, "I need a doctor in here. Now. Not in 5 minutes." The response crackled back, "Which attending?" "Any attending." "Emergency." "Bed 4." She returned to the bedside and sat on the chair beside Commander Hayes's head. His eyes were closed, the medication keeping him sedated while the ventilator breathed for him. The right side of his body was rigid, muscle tone abnormal. His lips were beginning to pale. She checked her watch, 0611. The attending physicians would arrive from their offices, from their homes, from wherever they'd been. This was the moment everything changed. Dr. Sterling appeared in the doorway at 0619, and behind him came the other 9. That was the thing about Sterling, he moved through Oak Creek Memorial like a general surveying his troops, and the troops followed. There was Dr. Hawthorne, the pulmonologist. Dr. Chen, cardiothoracic surgery. Dr. Patel, anesthesia. Dr. Morrison, respiratory. Dr. Kwan, emergency medicine. Dr. Abbas, internal medicine. Dr. Rivera, critical care. Dr. Okonkwo, trauma. And Dr. Hassan, the newest attending, who'd made the mistake of questioning Sterling's diagnosis protocols during morning rounds last month and had spent the last 4 weeks quietly erased from every high-stakes case. 10 doctors. The entire attending staff that Sterling had been poisoning against Megan since the moment she requested Commander Hayes' assignment. Sterling's eyes landed on her first, and something cold moved across his face, recognition that she had called for him, that she had breached protocol by not going through channels, that she had dared to summon. "Ms. O'Brien," he said, his tone carrying the faint suggestion that even speaking her name was a courtesy she didn't deserve. "What seems to be the issue?" "Oxygen saturation 85% and dropping. Left lung silent. Tracheal deviation to the right. Asymmetric chest wall movement. I believe he's developing tension pneumothorax." She delivered it without inflection, the facts stacked like evidence at a trial. She didn't point. She didn't gesture with alarm. She simply stated what her hands and eyes and 12 years of military medicine told her to be true. Sterling moved to the bedside with the casual confidence of someone who'd never been wrong in his life. He studied the monitor for exactly 3 seconds. He didn't examine the patient. He turned to face the 9 doctors arranged like a jury behind him. "Differential diagnosis," he said, and it wasn't a request. "Thoughts?" "Pulmonary embolism," Dr. Hawthorne offered immediately. "Elevated risk post-trauma." "Acute cardiac dysfunction," Dr. Chen added. "We should get a bedside echo." "Could be sepsis starting," Dr. Patel suggested. "Fever 3 hours ago, it's down now but." "We need imaging," Sterling said. His voice carried the absolute certainty of someone who understood that the longer you talked, the more the room believed you. "Call radiology. Tell them we need a stat CT pulmonary protocol." He glanced at the clock on the wall, the kind with the red second hand that made time visible in a way that felt threatening. "And get thoracic surgery to review the case remotely. We're not making moves until we have confirmation." One of the residents moved to the phone. Megan watched the oxygen saturation on the monitor, 82% now. Dropping in real time. The commander's lips were losing color, that pale waxy appearance that happened when the body wasn't getting enough oxygen fast enough. His heart rate climbed, 138, 140, 142. The monitor alarms began their insistent chirping. "Thoracic surgery is in OR," the resident reported. "Dr. Morrison is finishing a lobectomy. ETA for phone consult is 20 minutes. ETA for bedside evaluation is approximately 40 minutes. 40 minutes. Megan had watched men die in less time than that. She stood. The movement was small, controlled, the kind of motion that didn't draw attention. Or it shouldn't have. But Dr. Sterling's eyes tracked her immediately, the way predators notice when prey moves. "Where are you going, Ms. O'Brien?" he asked, his tone making it clear that she had no right to go anywhere without permission. "Supply cart," she said. "The 14-gauge needle." "For what purpose?" Sterling's voice had taken on the cadence of a prosecutor. The 9 doctors turned to face her in unison, their attention suddenly a physical weight. "Needle decompression." "Absolutely not." Sterling moved between Megan and the supply cart with the calculated precision of someone blocking a doorway. "You will not perform any invasive procedure. This is a physician's decision, and no decision has been made. Is that understood?" The oxygen saturation clicked down 80%. The commander's eyes were starting to roll back slightly, the consciousness buried under sedation flickering at the edges. His blood pressure had begun to drop, 102/65. 101/63. The cascade was starting, the body's systems beginning their shutdown sequence. Megan looked at Sterling. She looked at the 9 doctors arranged behind him. She looked at the monitor. She looked back at Sterling. When she spoke, her voice had dropped an octave. "Dr. Sterling, with respect, this patient is minutes away from cardiac arrest. Tension pneumothorax is compressing his heart. The longer we wait, the longer we practice medicine based on evidence instead of hunches." Sterling turned back to the 9 doctors. "This nurse has been unreliable from her first day here. She has repeatedly overstepped her authority. She has made it abundantly clear that she believes she knows better than the physicians in this hospital. I would ask that we all be very careful not to let emotion guide us into allowing. His pressure is 98/59. The resident's voice cut through Sterling's monologue like a blade. O2 sat is 79. The room went so quiet you could hear the ventilator's mechanical breath, each cycle now a fight against increasing pressure. The commander's wife was somewhere in the hallway with their daughter, probably sleeping or praying or doing both. She had no idea that her husband was suffocating from inside his own chest cavity. Megan moved. Not toward Sterling. Around him. She walked to the supply cart with the kind of unhurried purpose of someone who knew exactly what she was doing and understood the consequences with perfect clarity. The 14-gauge needle was in the emergency drawer, sealed in its sterile package, waiting for exactly this moment. She opened it with one hand, pulled on a fresh pair of gloves with the other. She was aware of Sterling's voice beginning to rise behind her, aware of 9 doctors shifting their weight, aware of every eye in the room suddenly focused on her hands. "I said stop, Ms. O'Brien." Sterling's voice had lost its controlled precision. It had become the voice of a man watching his authority walk away from him. "If you touch that patient, I will have you removed from this hospital. I will contact the state board. I will file a criminal complaint. Do you understand me?" She did understand. She understood perfectly. But the commander's oxygen saturation was at 76%. His heart rate was 153. His pupils were beginning to dilate. She had perhaps 90 seconds before something broke inside him that no amount of surgery could repair. Megan exposed his chest, her hands moving with the certainty of muscle memory, the kind of precision that comes from muscle fiber remembering itself. She found the second intercostal space, the groove between his ribs, using her fingers as calipers, the same way she'd done it in a dust storm in Helmand Province with helicopters screaming overhead. Midclavicular line. She felt for the exact spot where the needle should go, felt the resistance of muscle and membrane, felt the boundary between the known world and the one that lived underneath. She inserted the needle through the chest wall and into the space between the lung and the pleura, and the moment the needle punctured through, the room erupted in sound. The rush of air escaping. That was the sound that told her everything was going to change. That hiss, pure pressure releasing, months of accumulated tension finding freedom in one single motion. The commander's chest expanded. His oxygen saturation began its climb, 79, 82, 85, 88, 90%. His color shifted from the desperate pale to something closer to human. His heart rate began its descent. 140, 120, 105. The monitors sang in harmony. The 10 doctors stood frozen. In that moment, in the space between her hands and the evidence before them, something shifted in the room's physics. Sterling's face had gone beyond red. His hands were shaking, actually trembling, the kind of physical response that came from rage so pure it had nowhere else to go. "What the hell did you just do?" His voice cracked on the word do, and that crack told Megan everything she needed to know about what was coming. "You just practiced medicine without a license. That's a criminal ACT. You assaulted this patient." Megan stepped back from the bedside. She was aware that she was still wearing the gloves, still holding the needle. She was aware that one of the 9 doctors, Dr. Okonkwo, was staring at the monitor with something that might have been awe. She was aware that the commander's wife had heard the yelling and was beginning to move down the hallway, fear in her footsteps. She took one measured breath. Not the breath of fear. Not the breath of shame. The breath of someone who had made a choice and would stand in that choice like bedrock. "The technique is called needle decompression," she said quietly, and her voice had changed. The timidity was gone. What remained was something else, something built on a foundation of 11 hours in Marjah holding a position while everything around her was dying. Second intercostal space, midclavicular line. You'll want to remember that, in case you ever find yourselves in a situation where protocol can't save someone and you have to choose between being right and being useful. She stripped off the gloves. Dropped them in the biohazard waste. She looked at the 9 doctors one by one, at Hawthorne, at Chen, at Patel, at Morrison, at Kwan, at Abbas, at Rivera, at Okonkwo, at Hassan. Their faces were a gallery of conflicting emotions: shock, awe, fear, something that might have been guilt. Sterling was already on his phone, already punching numbers with the mechanical precision of someone whose world had just contracted. His voice, when he spoke, was controlled again, that frightening kind of control that comes from redirecting pure fury into tactical action. I need the administrative director. Emergency. And get me the personnel database. I need O'Brien's complete file. Now. Megan moved toward the door. She wasn't running. Running would have felt like surrender. She was walking with the same measured pace she'd learned in combat, the pace of someone who understood that the worst moments often looked the same on the outside as the best ones. The 0700 shift started like every other shift, fluorescent lights humming their tired song, the ICU breathing with machines and muted alarms. Megan moved through the ward with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to become part of the architecture, noting vitals, checking drips, invisible in her scrubs. She reached Commander Hayes's bed and felt her chest tighten. His oxygen saturation was 85% and dropping. The numbers on the monitor told a story she'd learned to read in blood and silence. Something was wrong, and it was happening fast. She pressed 2 fingers to his radial pulse. Strong but rapid. 118 beats per minute. His breathing had changed overnight, shallower, more labored. The kind of breathing that meant his lungs were fighting against something. She'd seen this pattern before, in a medevac helicopter over Helmand Province, in a field hospital where they were out of beds and out of time. The pattern of a body starting to fail. Hayes. Can you hear me? Her voice was low, steady. Try to take a breath for me. His eyes opened. Confused. Something's wrong. Can't breathe right. She was already moving, her hands checking the ventilator settings, the 4 lines, the monitor leads. Nothing obvious. Nothing that explained the decline. But the numbers didn't lie. Oxygen sat at 82 now. 81. The trend line falling like a stone. She keyed the intercom. I need morning rounds on bed 4. Now. 10 minutes later, the attending physicians arrived, Dr. Sterling at the front, his presence like a pressure change in the room, followed by residents, interns, the entire morning hierarchy of Oak Creek Memorial. They were here because protocol demanded it. They were not here because they trusted the nurse who'd made the call. Sterling approached the bed with the bearing of a man who'd never been questioned. What's the issue, Ms. O'Brien? O2 sat 91% and dropping since 0630. Heart rate elevated. Respiratory distress. I want a chest X-ray and a blood gas. Probably anxiety. Post-trauma response. Wheel. The monitor changed everything. Hayes's chest suddenly became asymmetric, the right side collapsing inward while the left expanded. His trachea deviated leftward, visible even without touching him. His oxygen saturation plummeted, 88, 83, 79. The ventilator alarm shrieked. His blood pressure crashed, 120/80, then 105/60. His skin turned the color of wet concrete. Tension pneumothorax, Megan said. The words came from somewhere bone deep. Right side. We need a needle decompression. Now. Sterling's face hardened. We'll get a chest X-ray to confirm. We don't have time for confirmation. His O2 is 75. His BP is bottoming. Every second we wait, his heart loses more volume. He'll arrest. The 10 attending physicians stood frozen around the bed. Dr. Chen looked at her notes. Dr. Walsh checked the monitor again, as if a second look would change what was written there. Dr. Patel started talking about protocols. We should call thoracic surgery. They're 20 minutes out. We can bridge him with. The words kept coming, a chorus of bureaucrats while the man on the bed was dying. Oxygen sat at 72. Megan moved to the supply cart. Her hands knew the way without conscious thought. 14-gauge needle. She'd performed this procedure twice in the field, once while taking fire, once with a flashlight clenched between her teeth and her left arm bleeding into her lap. The anatomy was the same whether you were in a Quonset hut outside Marjah or an ICU in Denver, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, just above the rib. "Step back," she said. Not a request. Not a question. A command that carried the weight of someone who'd made worse decisions in worse places and lived with them. Sterling moved forward instead. "You cannot." Megan's eyes met his for one frozen moment. The rest of the world fell away. When she spoke, her voice had dropped an octave. "Your move, Doctor." She turned back to Hayes. Found the landmarks with her fingertips. Mark the spot. The needle went in with the precision of something practiced 1,000 times in muscle memory. Through the skin. Through the fascia. Through the second rib, just above. Into the pleural space where air was compressing the lung, suffocating the heart. The hiss came next. A rush of air escaping like a tire blowout. Like relief. Like a body getting a second chance. O2 sat 92. The monitor normalized. Sinus rhythm returned. Blood pressure climbed, 88/50, then 92/56, then 102/60. Hayes's color came back. Not all the way, but enough. The color of someone still tethered to the world. Sterling's face went the shade of old brick. "You just committed practicing medicine without a license. You violated protocol. You violated." "I saved his life," Megan said quietly. She was already moving to get a chest tube tray, already inserting the larger catheter to stabilize the decompression, already doing the work that the 10 doctors should have done. "Call thoracic surgery now. Tell them we've decompressed a tension pneumo on the right. They can take it from here." Sterling turned to the security guard stationed near the ICU entrance. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The gesture was enough, a point of the finger, a tilt of the head. The guard understood the language. Everyone in Oak Creek Memorial understood the language that Dr. Sterling spoke. The security guard approached Megan as she was securing the chest tube. "I'm going to need you to come with me." She didn't look up from the procedure. "I'm finishing this patient's care first." "Now, please." Megan's hands finished what they'd started. Secured the tube. Confirmed placement. Checked the monitor one final time. O2 sat 96. Blood pressure stable. The crisis had passed. She removed her gloves and turned to face Sterling. Their eyes met for a second time. Longer this time. Deeper. "Thank you for the opportunity," she said. The words were soft, but they carried something that made 2 of the 10 doctors look away. Sterling's jaw was working like he was chewing glass. "You're terminated. Effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises. Your badge is deactivated." The walk from the ICU took 7 minutes. Megan didn't try to hurry. She'd learned long ago that how you carried yourself mattered more than how fast you moved. The security guard followed 3 paces behind, uncomfortable in the role of escort. In the break room, nurses watched through the window. Nobody said anything. Nobody moved. They were learning the cost of proximity to Dr. Sterling's enmity. Her locker was small. The combat boots sat at the bottom, worn leather creased with the shape of every mile. She pulled them out, stared at them for a moment, the only thing she'd kept from before, then put them on the shelf beside her spare scrubs. Some things you couldn't carry with you. Some things you had to leave behind. The parking lot was warm. Denver sun beating down on asphalt. Her badge didn't work on the gate. A security officer had to manually override it, embarrassed, apologetic, the kind of apology that meant nothing. She stood at the curb with a cardboard box balanced against her hip. Inside, a cracked mug that said "A World's Okayest Nurse" from a Secret Santa 3 years ago, a succulent from the ICU windowsill, its leaves brown and curled, a photograph in a frame showing 8 faces smiling at the camera. "Marjah, 2010. 7 of those faces were in the ground now. The other face belonged to her. The rain started 2 minutes after she reached the bus stop. Cold, hard rain that came down like judgment. The photograph was already getting soft at the edges, the moisture seeping through the cardboard. She could feel it happening. Paper dissolving. Memories bleeding into each other. She watched her reflection in the puddles at her feet, watched it break apart with every raindrop, watched it dissolve. A bus pulled up. The doors hissed open. She didn't get on. It left. Another came. She still didn't move, her combat boot soaked through, her cardboard box becoming cardboard pulp. Finally, she shifted the box, balanced it better, and started walking. Her apartment was small, 700 square feet in a building where nobody asked questions. She began packing that evening, boxes everywhere, packing tape gun on the kitchen counter, the sound of ripping tape like something tearing inside her chest. She didn't know where she'd go. Couldn't go back to the Coast Guard. They'd understand why she left, but understanding doesn't create options. Can't stay in Denver. The hospital would make sure of it. Sterling would make sure of it. She sat on the floor surrounded by boxes, holding the photograph from the bus stop, running her thumb over the faces of the dead. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jacob, "Mom, call me. Important." She stared at the message. Put the phone on the counter. Ignored it. 2 miles away, in an office at Oak Creek Memorial, Dr. Sterling was accessing the hospital's personnel database. His fingers moved across the keyboard with the precision of someone who'd learned to manipulate systems a long time ago. He pulled up Megan's employment file. Scrolled through references, nursing school records, the timeline of her arrival at Oak Creek Memorial 2 years ago. Then he opened another screen, the hospital's interface with the National Practitioner Data Bank. Military records databases. He found her discharge papers. O'Brien, Megan Catherine, Coast Guard, Honorable Discharge. The rank was listed, Senior Chief Petty Officer, Special Operations. He leaned back in his chair. His mind was already moving ahead, already calculating angles. He clicked on the file. Attempted to download it. A notification appeared, user does not have authorization for military records access. He tried again, using an administrator override code he'd obtained months ago from a grateful IT technician whose evaluation he'd inflated. The code worked. The file downloaded. He opened it in editing software. His fingers moved. Changed honorable to the general under honorable conditions. Inserted language about fitness for duty concerns and mental health discharge. Saved the altered file. Uploaded it back to the hospital's personnel system. Printed copies. His plan crystallized, present the doctored records to the board, claim she'd falsified her nursing application, justify the termination retroactively, eliminate any possibility of her appealing or suing. What Sterling didn't know was that military records databases maintain automatic audit trails. Every access. Every download. Every alteration is flagged and logged. Attempting to alter military service records is a federal crime. It triggers automatic FBI notification. The moment his fingers had pressed save, alarms had begun ringing in places he couldn't see. At the FBI field office in Denver, Agent Sarah Chen received an automated alert, unauthorized access and attempted alteration of protected military personnel records. She pulled up the details. Oak Creek Memorial Hospital. User ID traced to Dr. Marcus Sterling. She opened the file history. Downloaded. Re-downloaded. Editing software accessed. She made a call to her supervisor, we need to open a case. Possible stolen Valor adjacent, someone's tampering with a veteran service record. Back in Megan's apartment, late that night, she was asleep on the couch in her scrubs when someone pounded on the door. Her body moved before her mind woke, defensive posture, hands up, muscle memory 10 years in the making. She was on her feet, ready, before she understood what was happening. She opened the door. It was Jacob. Her 17-year-old son. Hand shaking. Holding a shadow box. Inside the box, 2 bronze stars, a purple heart, her senior chief petty officer insignia, a special operations patch. A photograph of her receiving a commendation from a Coast Guard admiral. His eyes were red. "Mom, why didn't you tell me? I found this with your drill manual." She stared at the shadow box like it might bite her. Her voice was steady. "Jacob, put that away. Commander Hayes is asking for you. They won't let you back in the hospital. But if they saw these, if they knew who you really are." She cut him off. "They don't need to know. That life is over." He slammed his hand against the door frame. Desperation and love and teenage rage mixing in the small apartment. "You're not just anything, Mom. You saved his life and they fired you for it. And he's asking for you. He knows who you are." She went very still. "Hayes knows." Jacob nodded. "He recognized your name from military records. He said you'd try to disappear. He told me to find you." She looked at the shadow box. At the medals she earned in blood and sand. Took one measured breath. "Get in the car." They drove through Denver at dawn, the shadow box on the passenger seat between them, Megan's hands gripping the wheel so tight her knuckles were white bone, the city still asleep beneath them, unaware that everything was about to change. She drove through Denver at dawn, the shadow box on the passenger seat between them, Megan's hands gripping the wheel so tight her knuckles were white bone, the city still asleep beneath them, unaware that everything was about to change. Jacob sat rigid in the passenger seat, the cardboard box balanced on his lap like it might shatter if he breathed wrong. His hands trembled. Not from fear. From the weight of what he was holding. 2 bronze stars. A purple heart. And the rest of the medals his mother had locked away 14 years ago, the day she decided to disappear into scrubs and invisibility. "They called the house," Jacob said, his voice steady but thin. "Commander Hayes' wife. She said he keeps asking for you. That you were the only one who knew something was wrong before anyone else could see it." He turned to look at her. "And they won't let you back in." Megan's jaw tightened. One measured breath. Her eye stayed on the road. The city scrolled past, empty streets, traffic lights blinking red to green to red again, a rhythm like a heart monitor. She'd stood outside a bus stop in the rain last night, her career in a cardboard box, her life reduced to a dying succulent and a cracked mug and a photograph of men who no longer existed. 18 hours ago she'd been fired. Terminated. The word still felt like a gunshot in a quiet room. Now her hands moved on instinct, the same instinct that had held a position in Marjah for 11 hours after her team was killed. The same instinct that had grabbed a 14-gauge needle and performed a procedure 10 doctors said she wasn't qualified to perform. Her hands knew the way to Oak Creek Memorial without her mind having to navigate. She pulled into the parking lot at 6:56 a.m. The hospital rose in front of them like a fortress, all glass and steel and the promise of redemption or catastrophe. The sun was just breaking the mountains in the east, painting the sky the color of old copper. Jacob opened the passenger door before the car fully stopped. "Mom, wait." He pulled the shadow box toward him. His eyes had that same quality hers did, the kind of calm that came from having already survived the worst. "Whatever happens in there, you need to know something. I know who you are. And I'm not letting them make you invisible anymore." She looked at her son. 17 years old. Enlistment paperwork already signed. Coast Guard, just like her. Just like his father. The men in that photograph from Marjah would recognize him in an instant, the same steady gaze, the same refusal to flinch when the world tried to break you. "Let's go," she said. The ICU hallway was quiet. That early morning quiet where only the machines were awake, their electronic voices filling the silence, monitors beeping, ventilators hissing, the soft mechanical breathing of people kept alive by technology and the grace of people who still believed in trying. Megan pushed through the double doors with Jacob beside her, the shadow box in her hands now, no longer hidden. Commander Hayes' room was the third on the left. But before they reached it, Jacob stopped at the nurse's station. Every head in the ICU turned toward them. Nurses recognized her immediately, the woman they'd been told to avoid, the one Dr. Sterling had poisoned the entire unit against. The one who'd been escorted out by security like a criminal. Jacob stepped forward. His voice was loud enough to carry. Not shouting. Just the kind of clarity that comes from absolute certainty. My mother is Senior Chief Petty Officer Megan O'Brien, United States Coast Guard, Special Operations Command. She's the one you all abandoned yesterday when Dr. Sterling told you to. And she's the reason Commander Hayes is still alive. The room went so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights hum. A visiting nurse from the VA stepped forward. Her name tag read Rodriguez. Her hands were shaking as she took the shadow box and opened the file inside, her eyes scanning the documents beneath the medals. When she started reading, her voice cracked on every word. Bronze Star. She paused. Every eye in the ICU locked onto the medal catching the early morning light. Bronze Star. Purple Heart. Purple Heart. The silence held. The kind of silence that meant something had shifted in the universe, that the world everyone thought they understood had inverted itself completely. A man in a Coast Guard dress uniform appeared in the doorway. Former SEAL team leader, the kind of operator who'd seen enough combat to recognize it in a woman's hands, in the way she moved, in the absolute stillness of her composure. He walked to the shadow box. Took one of the purple hearts and held it up. Marjah, 2010. His voice carried through the entire ICU. She held a position for 11 hours after her team was killed. Alone. Pinned down. No air support. No extraction window. Just her and a rifle and the kind of courage that doesn't fit in policy manuals. He looked at Megan. A subtle nod. The kind of recognition that could only pass between people who'd stood in those exact coordinates of hell. Senior Chief. That was when the FBI agents walked in. 2 of them. Dark suits. The kind of presence that made the air in a room change its molecular composition. They moved directly to the nurse's station, badge leather worn smooth by years of carrying truth into rooms that didn't want it. The lead agent, a woman with grey at her temples and eyes like winter, scanned the ICU and found Megan immediately. "We're looking for Dr. Sterling," she said. Not a question. A statement of operational fact. A resident pointed toward his office. The agents moved without rushing. They had all the time in the world. That was the thing about federal crimes, they didn't expire. They just accumulated interest, like debt. 30 seconds later, Dr. Sterling appeared in the ICU hallway, the FBI agents on either side of him. He saw Megan. His face went the color of hospital walls, blank, empty, drained of every ounce of power he'd been certain was permanent. Dr. Marcus Sterling. The female agent held up her credentials. "You're under arrest for violation of 18 United States Code Section 499, falsification of military discharge records. You have the right to remain silent." Sterling's attorney materialized beside him like a suit summoned by catastrophe. But the agent kept talking, her voice steady and relentless. "You accessed Senior Chief O'Brien's personnel file at 1848 hours yesterday. Downloaded it to your personal laptop. Opened it in Adobe Acrobat. Made 17 alterations to the text. Changed her discharge status from honorable to general under honorable conditions. Inserted fabricated language about mental health concerns. Then re-uploaded the falsified documents to the hospital's personnel system. Federal crime. 3 to 5 years. And because you did this to cover up a wrongful termination based on retaliation, we're also pursuing obstruction charges." They walked him past Megan in the hallway. Past the spot where he'd humiliated her in front of Commander Hayes' family. Past the bulletin board where he'd posted the write-up about her inappropriate emotional involvement. His hands were cuffed behind his back. His jaw was moving but no words came out. The man who'd spent his entire career weaponizing silence and hierarchy had finally met something bigger than his institutional leverage. The handcuffs clicked when he walked. A small sound. The kind of sound that echoes in hallways for a long time. Commander Hayes was sitting up in bed when Megan entered his room. His wife and daughter stood on either side of him. When he saw Megan, something shifted in his face: recognition, gratitude, the kind of understanding that only came from knowing someone had chosen your life over their own career. Senior Chief. He tried to stand, but his wife gently pressed him back. They told me you were fired. That you violated protocol. That, he stopped. They were lying. They were protecting their version of the truth, Megan said. Her voice had changed. Dropped an octave. Lost all the deference it had carried in Scrubs. It wasn't the right version. But it was the one that made them comfortable. His daughter, who couldn't have been more than 12, walked over and hugged Megan without being asked. No protocols. No hierarchy. Just a child thanking the person who'd kept her father alive. Jacob appeared in the doorway with Rodriguez from the VA. Together, they'd already called the Coast Guard Public Affairs Office. By noon, the story would be everywhere: the nurse who was actually a decorated operator, the doctor who'd forged federal records, the 10 physicians who'd frozen when they should have acted. By that evening, Dr. Sterling's medical license was suspended pending investigation. By the following morning, Oak Creek Memorial's legal team had already drafted a reinstatement offer with full back pay and a formal apology. The CEO understood hospital liability the way other people understood gravity. A wrongfully terminated war hero was a lawsuit that hadn't happened yet, a PR disaster that could be contained if they moved fast enough. Megan stood in the ICU at midnight, checking Commander Hayes' vital signs one more time. His oxygen saturation was steady. Heart rate regular. The crisis had passed. Everything that needed to be fixed had been fixed by a woman in combat boots and a man in a dress uniform who'd walked into a room and changed everything simply by telling the truth. She touched the shadow box on the wall, the one Rodriguez had hung with a laminated plaque beneath it. Senior Chief Petty Officer Megan O'Brien. Heroism in service. Both military and medical. Invisible, she wasn't anymore. If you know someone who's been underestimated, someone who's been doubted, someone whose quiet strength was mistaken for compliance, tell them you see them. Subscribe for more stories about the warriors among us. And comment below: have you ever been judged by someone who didn't know your real story?